Well, we're back from Texas, and it was a good trip. Saw some of my college friends, helped one of my college friends out, took some of my friends from here. We had a great week. And while I was gone, Josh Miles was up here, did a fantastic job last week. If you didn't get a chance to hear Josh teach last week, you need to check that out. It's good stuff. If you're a guest with us, you're welcome here. This is a safe place. It's a good place to be. And trust me, I'll try not to call on you. So thankful that you're here. And what we've been doing for the last several months, probably 5 months, is we've been going through the whole Bible, through the whole Old Testament, and we're to the point of the prophets, and this is considered a minor prophet. Daniel is a minor prophet. There's 12 chapters, as Josh explained last week in Daniel, and it's got 2 of the biggest children's stories in those 12 chapters that you probably grew up hearing about. Josh told you about one last week, which was in chapter 1. It was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No, it wasn't chapter 1. It was chapter 3, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they were put into the fiery furnace. And that was like one of the most popular. But today I'm going to teach you chapter 6. Chapter 6, which is Daniel in the lion's den. But here's what you're missing. You're missing the prophecy. Daniel was a prophet, and there was a lot of prophecy that was foretold by Daniel and actually fulfilled since then, and some that is yet to be fulfilled. And we've covered this probably about 3 years ago in here when we went through Daniel chapter by chapter. But this little trip through, we're just doing a flyby. But one of the, some of the most interesting things is Daniel interpreted the king's dream, and in that dream there was a statue, and the statue was made out of different metals. And Daniel pretty much explained that those were the next kingdoms to reign from the head down to the foot. And then if you actually take what Daniel said and you apply it to the actual history that happened over hundreds of years, it actually came true. Like the statue that was made up of different metals represented the Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, and different things like that. And you watch their dynasties come and go, and Daniel's prophecy became true. And then you get into chapters 7 through 12, and he really talks about the end times, talking about the end times. And there's some amazing things if you drill down into those chapters. Man, you can pinpoint down to the day some of his prophecy, which is pretty amazing to think about. Is that he nails this thing, and it's been foretold, and then it came true, and it is yet to come true. So I encourage you to go back and look at Daniel a little bit more. It may be complicated, but just like Josh said, you can figure it out. You have the same spirit in you that I have in me. The same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead lives inside of me, lives inside of you, gives you the ability to read the Bible and to understand the Bible. It doesn't take you going to seminary to be able to understand the Word of God. It's the Spirit of God in you that allows you to do that. And so today, we're going to look at chapter 6. And here's the situation. Is Daniel, this is chronologically, 1 through 6 is kind of like Daniel's life, and then 7 through 12 is his prophecy. So all those chapters are mixed up. But if you look at Daniel chapter 6, he's about 80 years old. The chapter 1, he's a teenager. The chapter 6, he's 80 years old. King Darius is on the throne. And King Darius is around 62 years of age. And he's sick. King Darius is sick. So let's look at what it says here. chapter 6, verse 1. It says, Darius decided to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom. He stationed them throughout the realm. Now, I know to you that probably doesn't mean much to you, but to me that says this dude was organized. This guy knew how to run, I hate to say it, a government. He knew how to break things down, so he had literally divided the kingdom up into 120 different sections, and he placed people in charge of them. A satrap is like a prince or a person with authority. And so now these 120 satraps were actually governing these different areas in the kingdom that Darius was the king of. In verse 2 it says, and over them 3 administrators, including Daniel. These satraps would be accountable to them so that the king would not be defrauded. So he's got 120 people in authority, and then over that is 3 different administrators. Each administrator is probably going to have, 40 satraps underneath them? And one of them is Daniel. They were probably told to watch the satraps for things like corruption, disloyalty, theft, and even poor administration, because that's the way that they were going to keep the kingdom strong, was look for the weak links. And Cyrus, get this, he had already crucified 3,000 Babylonians as he took over the Babylonians, because he wanted to prove his leadership. And although the previous king Belshazzar, he had now been eliminated, there was one person in Belshazzar's administration that was spared. Are you tracking with this? Remember what Daniel's story was, is that he was a Jew, and he was actually in Israel, and they got defeated by the Babylonians, and Nebuchadnezzar had him exiled to Babylonia. So now he's outside of his country. And then Belshazzar comes into reign, and he's placed into authority. He's a foreigner placed into authority over a foreign land. And then Darius becomes king. This is actually Daniel's 4th king that he's gone through. All right? Darius becomes king, and he puts him in charge in his administration. That's crazy to think about, that a foreigner has been put into authority in a foreign land by 2 different kings. What does that tell you about Daniel? It tells you that he is a straight-up guy. Says in verse 3, Daniel distinguished himself above the administrators and satraps because he had an extraordinary spirit. So the king planned to set him over the whole realm. Are you kidding me? The foreigner administrator, he's going to be over the whole thing, he's second in command to Darius the king. The administrators and satraps therefore kept trying to find a charge against Daniel regarding the kingdom, but they could find no charge or corruption, for he was trustworthy, and no negligence or corruption was found in him. Now, I have to mention this because it's part of our everyday life right now. But as soon as you walk out from these doors and you turn on the television, you're going to hear about these people that are running for president. And most likely you're going to hear about all the corruption that they've done, because everybody's going to do what? They investigate, the Republicans investigate the Democrats investigate the Republicans. They dig up all this trash and they throw it out there. On TV, on the internet. It's all out there. We've just been living with it. The exact same thing was happening right here. There was no internet, but they're literally trying to dig up any trash that they can on Daniel. And what did they find? Nothing. Nothing. They couldn't find anything to nail this guy. And he's one of the few people in the actual Word of God that, there's nothing bad written about him. I know you're sitting there saying, oh, all these godly people and everything that are mentioned in the Scripture, Well, there's very few that are like perfect. There's very few that are perfect in their description. Now, get this. I'm not saying Daniel never sinned. Daniel absolutely sinned. He was a sinner just like you and I. There's just no mention or any discovery of what he's done publicly. The idea that he is second in command found opposition among the other administrators. They're jealous. They're trying to figure out how to get him out. But his conduct was absolutely blameless. I would say that jealousy is a normal reaction in people who are passed over by promotions. It's a pretty common thing. So if you can find some trash on them to get yourself in a higher position, that's pretty common. Then we look at verse 5. It says, "Then these men said, 'We will never find any charge against this Daniel unless we find something against him concerning the law of his God.'" Now they're scheming. Now they're plotting. Now they're trying to figure out, well, if he hasn't done anything, let's make him do something. So they tried to find something wrong with his service, and even that they had to dig down into his character, which he absolutely loved God. Verse 6, it says, "So the administrators and the satraps went together to the king and said to him," the sick king, said, "May King Darius live forever," because they knew he wasn't going to. It says, "May King Darius live forever. All the administrators of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the advisors, and the governors have agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an edict that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den." They lied by acting like Daniel was included in this decision. Like they have already deceived the sick, dying king and said, "We've all agreed." Daniel was not in this agreement. Verse 8, it says, "Therefore, your majesty, establish the edict and sign the document so that as the law of the Medes and Persians, it is irrevocable and cannot be changed." You see, once it's made a law, the king himself could not change what he had written, because he would be admitting his own failure if he changed it. It says, "So King Darius signed the document." In other words, the king had now been deceived. He did not see this diabolical plan behind this decree that he had signed. It said in verse 10, "When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he went into his house." He hadn't heard about this, and now he's heard about this document that the king has declared law. The windows in its upper room opened toward Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees, prayed, and gave thanks to his God, just as he had done before. In other words, what did he do about this new law? He broke the law. He broke the law because why? His God and the relationship to his God was more important than those man-made laws that the king had just put into order. When there is a law, even like a civil law, that diametrically opposes the law of God, which one are you going to choose? Well, we know what Daniel chose. He chose to oppose the law of man rather than of God. So he, in a sense, did practice like civil disobedience, because it was a ridiculous law he had been set up. Verse 11, it says, "Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God." Some of these men actually knew how many times a day Daniel prayed. Like, it was a ritual with him. Like, 3 times a day he would go to his room, kneel, and pray to God, face Jerusalem, and pray to his Lord. And they knew. So it wasn't that difficult to pin him down. Verse 12, it says, "They approached the king and asked about his edict. 'Didn't you sign an edict that for 30 days any man who petitions any god or man except you, the king, will be thrown into the lion's den?'" The king answered, as a law of the Medes and Persians, the order stands and is irrevocable. Like, he hasn't thought about Daniel at all. He's just thought, yeah, this is a pretty good law. Everybody's in agreement with it. It says in verse 13, then they replied to the king, Daniel, one of the Judean exiles, has ignored you, the king, and the edict you signed, for he prays 3 times a day. Now, can you imagine if King Darius has made Daniel like the number 2 man in his kingdom? Don't you think he knows him pretty well? Don't you think he trusts him? Don't you think he knows that he loves his Lord, his God? And don't you think all of a sudden it just clicked? I've just been set up. I've just been set up by the rest of my administrators and satraps. All of a sudden, the pieces came together. And what was Daniel's crime? That he was praying to his God 3 times a day. Verse 14 says, as soon as the king heard this, he was very displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel and made every effort until sundown to deliver him. You see, all of a sudden it clicked and he became distressed about, what did I just do to not only like one of my top administrators, but my friend? Like, there was a kinship and a love for Daniel. And he's immediately thinking, I can't reverse the law. I can't change it. How do I rescue Daniel? How do I save him? How do I get him out of this mess that I didn't mean to get him into? It says, verse 15, then these men went to the king and said to him, you as king know it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that no edict or ordinance the king establishes can be changed. Now, most ancient laws stipulated the execution of the sentence within a matter of hours, usually the same day. Like, it had to happen immediately. Daniel had to be thrown into the den of angry, hungry lions that day. And as the sun went down, the conspirators appeared before the king and says, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's time for Daniel to face his sentence. In verse 16 it says, so the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. So here's the picture. Daniel's been arrested, and there's this actual den, a hole in the ground that they store lions in. There's no food in there other than what they feed them. So they go to this hole in the ground. The administrators, the satraps, with Daniel. And he's standing there, and the king actually leaves his throne and comes to this same lion's den and stands there next to Daniel. And he says, may the God you pray to save you. What does that tell you? It tells me that Darius believes in the God that Daniel believes in. He's watched Daniel, he's seen Daniel, he's watched him live his life, and the things that have come true, the things that he's prophesied about, the things that he's done to interpret each other's dreams. It all makes sense to him, and he's like, let your God save you, let him rescue you. It's almost like he's saying, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The king who loved Daniel went along so he could be with Daniel. It says a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. This wasn't much different than when Jesus was sealed in the tomb. And by that, I mean they were literally sealed. They took wax and poured around the seam of where the rock met the cave or the hole. And then the king would take his signet ring and place it into the wax to say, this is an official seal. Like, no one is to move this. I have a crew that has actually been sealed up and nobody is getting out of this thing. It says in verse 18, then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. Spent the night fasting. What does that look like? The dude couldn't sleep. And he definitely wasn't hungry because he was stressed out about his friend Daniel. No diversions were brought to him and he could not sleep. He spent this restless night just fasting. He even refused all entertainment and pleasure. Like, leave me alone. I just want to be alone. And you know what isolation gets you, right? Right? If you're there, especially at nighttime, if you're laying there in bed, all you can do is think. And I tell you, the evil one will put crazy thoughts into your head, especially at night. And this is what's happening to Darius. He's like going crazy, just sitting there thinking about, how Daniel got devoured. Like he's picturing it. These are the thoughts that are just like spontaneously popping up in his head as he's laying there in isolation during the night. At night, in 19 it says, at the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. Like he's literally, at this point, out of his bed, looking out the window, waiting for that sun to peek over the horizon. And as soon as it does, he's out the door. He's out the door. And he didn't send his men after him to see what a mess it was going to be. He went himself. Darius left and went straight there to the lion's den. It says when he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel. He didn't know anything at this point, but he's just freaking out. He says, Daniel, servant of the living God, the king said, has your God whom you serve continually been able to rescue you from this lion's den? Oh, you missed that. You missed that, right? Did you miss that? He said, this is what the King Darius said. Daniel, servant of the living God. Like, your God's not dead. I've seen what he's done. I'm assuming that he's still alive. He's the giver of life. And in verse 21 it says, oh, this is crazy. Then Daniel spoke with the king. May the king live forever. That's the first thing the king hears out of Daniel's mouth. May the king live forever. Are you kidding me? Like I would have said, yeah, I'm here. But Daniel says, may the king live forever. What? Like, you're supposed to be shredded. You're in there with the lions. They haven't eaten in days. They're hungry. Are you kidding me? May the king live forever. It says, that's like the fourth time we've heard that expression in Daniel, O king, live forever. Because he said it to basically all four kings that he was under their reign. He started with Nebuchadnezzar, then he went to Belshazzar, then he went to Darius, and then finally Cyrus. He was under four different kings during that time. Verse 22 it says, my God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth. I'll just let you sit on that one for a second. My God sent his angel I'm assuming Daniel saw that. He saw the angel. And they shut the lion's mouth. Mouths is plural. There was more than one lion there. They haven't hurt me, for I was found innocent before him, capital H. I was found innocent before God. Also, I have not committed a crime against you, my king. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. Can you imagine what that looked like? Like, get him out of there. Get him out of the hole. And as soon as Daniel was taken out of that hole, there had to have been an embrace. It had to be glorious. And I'm not talking just for Darius. I'm talking for Daniel too. Look what my God did. I'm not even supposed to be here right now. Yet, I'm able to hug my brother and continue to serve him even though he threw me in the lion's den. So Daniel was taken out of the den uninjured, for he trusted in his God. You heard that, right? Trusted in his God. The king then gave the command, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lion's den. Oh. Now it becomes epic movie right here. All right? This is like epic movie. Daniel comes out. The lions are in there. They not only take the men, but look what it says. It takes the men, they, their children, and their wives. That's rough. That's rough. Throwing children in there? They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. I'd say they were hungry. They were hungry even when Daniel was in there. But it was Daniel's God who saved him. I have to say this, but it's a wicked thing to not only throw their spouses in there, but to throw their children in there. But the kings really had this, like they lived in constant fear that if the dad of these children wants to kill the king, why wouldn't the children want to grow up and kill the king? And so it made sense to go ahead and throw the children in there so they wouldn't grow up and become against the king. I know that's wicked. And then it closes out, chapter 6. Then King Darius wrote to those of every people, nation, and language who live in all the earth. May your prosperity abound. I issue a decree that in all my royal dominion people must tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. Like my friend here, his God, he's the real deal. He's living. This man is proof of it. It says, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. Darius declared everyone to have fear and reverence for Daniel's God for these reasons. For one, he's a living God. Two, he endures forever. Three, his kingdom is not going to be destroyed. And four, his dominion will never end. Like King Darius said, this is the reason that you should fear your God. Verse 27, it says, he rescues and delivers. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. For he has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Thank God, the God of Daniel is still able to do all that we think or ask. I believe that. God rescues and He saves from situations that seem impossible. It says, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. You see, I know some of you are sitting out here and you probably feel like you're in the lion's den or you've been through the lion's den. And the one thing that sticks out to me in this whole passage, this whole chapter is this. Just trust God. Just trust God. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to unfold. I can't tell you that. All I can tell you is to trust God. Trust Daniel's God. Trust the God who's chosen to create you and to even live inside of you. That's crazy. Trust Him. Father, I pray that you, Daniel's God, my God, will continue to watch over us, protect us, give us faith. Lord, give us faith that we can just trust you in all things. I pray for those that are out there hurting today, those that are feel like they're in the lion's den, that you'll watch over them, that you will provide them a way out, that you will keep them safe, just as you always have. And I pray these things in